We're here at Beyond Baroque, the famous poets and poetry venue in Venice Beach, California, with the eminent director, Jimmy Vega. And we're going to do a little bit of twist and turn today, and Jimmy's going to interview me about my wonderful wife, the great poet and performance artist, poetry diva of the city of Los Angeles, Linda J. Albertano, who some of you may not know, but she passed away a couple years ago. And we've been doing a lot in her memory, and I've recently published 4 books on her poetry and on her life, and I'm soon going to publish a 5th one. And I'll talk about the books in a little bit, but go ahead, Jimmy. Thanks for having me over.
Yeah, thanks, Frank, for coming over to Beyond Baroque. We're in the infamous Scott Wamberg bookstore here at Beyond Baroque. And of course, we're doing this interview during April, which is not only National Poetry Month as we know it here, but it's also Linda J. Albertano's birthday month as well. And in a couple weeks, we will be celebrating our our third Linda J. Albertano Fellow. And we're excited to make that announcement and celebrate them and their work here in the space. But going back to Linda, and going back to National Poetry Month, I was wondering, Frank, if there was a poem of Linda's that, you've maybe recently read, a poem that surprised you or was, something that as part of her oeuvre. Wanted to know if you, maybe wanted to share a few lines, but also talk about how that poem impacted you and maybe a little history about that poem itself.
Well, since you spoke about it, there's a poem that she wrote called Virtue. And it was, I published it in the first book on the life of Linda J. Albertano, and in the bookstores. And I hold it up there a little bit so you can see it better, with her picture on the front. And all of the books are 8x10 format, and they're all over 200 pages. And what was surprising to me about her wanting to do a book, we talked about this before COVID, actually, and then COVID happened, and things got messy. And then shortly after COVID, she found out that she was very ill with cancer. And 5 months later, she went into the afterlife. So this was the first book that I published on the life of Linda J. Albertano. And what's nice about this book is it has a lot of photographs of her in action, and also write-ups by newspapers and magazines about how great a poet she was. One of the poets that really strikes me is something called Virtue, and it's actually 3 pages long. I'm just going to read the opening paragraphs. It's wonderful. Virtue rides into town on a convertible Clydesdale. She's wrapped in blue and white stars and is eating an apple concoction. Ah, Virtue. They want you. Your symbols are so succulent. They want to use you for purposes of personal adornment. They want to pin you wholesome and lovely to their lapels. And it goes on, and it's just a remarkable poem. And all of her poems, to me, were remarkable, but that's the first book. So what happened was, after Linda passed away, the first thing that I thought about when I woke up the next morning, I was so despondent about it. I thought to myself, she must be as desperate to talk to me as I am to talk to her. We'd been together for 55 years. That's 70% of our lives. We were together, and we're still together. But so I started studying how to be able to communicate with mediums and et cetera, et cetera. But I also decided I'm going to write a book of her poetry for her. She'd never written a book of poetry before she passed away, but she'd been published in over 200 publications around the world, in USA, Canada, Europe, Africa, et cetera. So I wrote the first book, and then I decided to write 3 more. So I wrote 4 books in 2 years, and then just in the last few months, I've written the 5th book. But the first one was on the life of Linda J. Albertano. The second book is called It All Began with Cherry Soup. It all began with cherry soup, and that's the 2 of us in our 30s on the front of it. And that's a funny story. I'd only been in L.A. A few weeks in February of 1968, and I had a fellow who had brought me out to. He'd seen me on a stage play as an actor back east. I'd acted in New York and also at the Antioch College summer stock. And he said, I would like to bring you out to LA. I think I can get you some movie work and some other kind of TV work. And I wasn't very interested, but in January of '68, I came out just to take a look. And in February of '68, it was raining one night, and it was dark and black and cold and windy, and I was standing in the rain hitchhiking. I didn't have a car. I was hitchhiking on Sunset Boulevard in Hollywood at 6:15 at night. And I hear this loud horn behind me, honk, honk, honk. And at first I ignored it, but then I turned around finally and looked, and there's this long arm sticking out of the car. And I went running up, and I looked in the car, and it was this beautiful young lady my age. And she said, come on, get in, it's raining. And I said, I got in, and I said, I forgot all about my meeting. I was supposed to be at a meeting at 7, I forgot about it. And I said, hi, I'm Frank, what's your name? She said, Linda. And so she's driving, and I said, you want to stop and have some coffee somewhere? And she said, no. And I started thinking. Then she said, but I'll stop and have tea and cherry soup with you. I said, cool, tea and cherry soup. Well, I knew what cherry soup was because I'd been to 3 universities in Europe, and in between university, I would work on a Danish farm with some friends, and I learned how to speak Danish. And cherry soup was one of their favorite national desserts. They took, real cherries and put them in a gelatin, and they'd serve, and to get it cold, and they'd serve whipped cream, and it was like a real delicacy. And so these guys had a restaurant, and they were making cherry soup, just like they did in Denmark. I guess they were Danish. But in any event, so we did that, and that night began everything, and for 55 years. So the second book I wrote is called It All Began with Cherry Soup. And again, it talks about how we met, and then some more of her poetry. And just so I'll tell you about the books real quickly. Jimmy knows them all, but I'm going to show you folks out there in Wonderland. This one is called, third book is called Two Souls Desperate to Connect. Two Souls Desperate to Connect. This is very interesting. It has some of her poetry and some of my poetry in it, but it's also about a year and a half of our transactions working together with a medium. The medium was a lady, a PhD psychologist in Connecticut, and I'm in California. And then Linda, of course, is in where we call the afterlife, and science has proven that there's someplace else that exists, regardless of what the skeptics think. And so it shows about the transactions. The lady would record them, and then she'd send them to me typewritten, and then I put those transactions of a year and a half in the book, so that people who have lost a loved one, what they call a DLO, a dear loved one, can learn how to communicate or learn that it's possible. And I tell them what I did to learn how to communicate with Linda. And I've had some good feedback from this book from people who wanted to know, how can I communicate with my loved one who's gone to the next world? So that's book number 3. Book number 4 is called Poetry Diva. Linda was one of the only, if not the only woman, and I'm researching this, I think she may be the only woman, there could be another one, a lady poet named Wanda Coleman. But Linda was named a Poetry Diva by the city of Los Angeles in a ceremony, and they gave her a big, beautiful plaque, a big wall plaque hanging, and it's got the seal of the city of Los Angeles underneath. It says, the city of Los Angeles designates Linda J. Albertano, the poet, as a Poetry Diva. And now Jimmy's in charge of that. He's got it here at Beyond Baroque, and we're going to find a permanent place to put that thing and hang it up so everybody can see it. But in any event, getting back to our story, so as time went on, I never told her that I was a poet too, because I never wanted her to think that I was competing with her. Right. And a few years later, she found my dossier of poems that I had written traveling around the world. It was about 2 inches thick, like a New York City phone book. And she found them, and she didn't even tell me this, but I I had been traveling. I was an oceanographer, a student oceanographer. I also had gone to universities in Europe, and I traveled to Africa, India, etc. You know, the South China Sea and the Indian Ocean, and anywhere, all over. And when I was doing that, in order to write a poem, I had to borrow somebody's typewriter. And so the typeset was all different fonts and different sizes for all of my poems. She had a lady who was working for us as a secretary retype all of my poems in the same size and same font so they were readable. And she put them in a book for me and said, "Here are your poems." And I had no idea, I was shocked. And she said she loved my poetry. She said, "I want to do a book with your poems in them because I love your poetry, Hanky." She called me Hanky. That was her pet name for me. Hanky was my mother's pet name for my dad, and she heard me say that. And so she started calling me Hanky.
Right.
So, so in any event, some of my poems are in the books, and Linda's poems, and I'm really proud to have them done for her in her temporary absence or whatever.
Yeah.
I'll rejoin her one of these days. And then I've written also a fifth book in the last few months. And that fifth book is sort of the story of our lives because we both had really adventurous lives. And the name of the book is Adventurous Lives Loved Together. It's not published yet, but Beyond Baroque will be the first folks to have it. Beyond Baroque is a book-selling place as well as a poetry venue. And you can buy all kinds of beautiful books here all about poetry at Beyond Baroque. My books are also in Amazon and also Barnes & Noble and here in Venice, the Small Worlds Bookshop, which is a famous bookstore here in Venice Beach, California. So anyway, getting back to poetry, what I find a lot of things really interesting about her poems, and I can talk about that, but I don't want to interrupt you if you have more questions too.
Yeah. I mean, a couple things that I noticed, especially going back to Linda's poem and to the fact that she was a poetry diva of Los Angeles. I always, and of course she has that famous poem To the Pacific. So with Linda, I always associate Los Angeles, the West Side. I always associate Venice with Linda. Can you say a little bit more about that? A little bit more about her life here in the City of Angels?
Sure. So Linda unfortunately grew up in foster homes from age 8 to age 16. It was an awful story. She was not well treated by some people in Denver, Colorado. Great city, wonderful city. One of our favorite pals Leslie Stanford lives in Denver, so so we have nothing bad to say about Denver. But I do about this family. And it really took a toll on her. And at age 19, she ended up in Los Angeles with $50 in her pocket that her father had given her. He was in Denver and he abandoned the family. And years before, I guess he felt guilty or something, so he gave her $50 to a 19-year-old kid. And she immediately started working as a waitress in this, but she was very tall and very beautiful and also very bright. And she was discovered, she had been an honors student in both high school and college. And I was too. I'm a Phi Beta Kappa graduate of UCLA. I had what they call summa cum laude. I graduated with all honors. She graduated in the film school at UCLA. And the year that she graduated, her film was voted #1 of 50 student films, #1 film. Based on that, she was hired by Anne Bancroft, Anne Bancroft, the great actress and director, the lady who'd been very prominent here in LA, and she worked on 3 films with Anne Bancroft. And then she stopped working in film. She didn't like getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning to go be at the studio.
Yeah.
And she concentrated on music and poetry after that. So then during her 20s, she concentrated a lot on poetry and also doing performance art. And more of that in her 30s and 40s, and then she, again became quite notorious and celebrated and became a poetry diva. And that was in I think that happened in the early part of this century. But she had already been sent by the city of Los Angeles several times to Europe to present poetry. Like she'd been sent to London, she'd been sent to Edinburgh, she'd been sent to Amsterdam, for festivals to present poetry and represent the city of Los Angeles, which I think was really great.
Yeah.
And then, of course, she got involved with some poets on other sides. This wonderful group of poets in New York City, Cat Georges and her mate, Peter Karloftes, they head up the Dada, and I'm going to explain a little bit about the Dada art movement in a minute, why that's so interesting. But Linda met those folks and got involved, and she became a Dada poet too. So so Linda was doing so much in poetry and presenting it in poetry venues like Beyond Baroque and other places that people started inviting her to do more and more. And like I say, the list of places where she's presented poetry is about 5 pages long in small print. And I haven't got a list of all of them, but at one point in the late 70s, she started doing performance art a lot, and she became celebrated for performance art. Here in LA, particularly in Beverly Hills, there were some really great places, like the Lhasa Club and some others, where they specialized in performance art. And so she was prominent there. She kept doing she'd like do a different show or different sort of poem of performance art, which is sort of like a small stage show by one person, just the artist, and very interesting. And she was given great reviews for that, and I've got a lot of the reviews about her in this book, the first book on the life of Linda J. Albertano. So. She also was publishing and having recorded some of her music, like Linda Ronstadt and the great Taj Mahal, the great blues musician, and some others, Steve Gillette and some others, recorded Linda's songs. And like 210 Train was a really popular one, 210 Train, etc., some others. So she was doing music as well, but then she finally decided just to stick with poetry and performance art because that's what she liked, and she became very prominent here all over California, of course, and then other countries, other cities, as I've said. But she also in the late '90s we met a famous kora player from West Africa named Prince Diabate. Prince Diabate plays this thing called a kora. It's a big round instrument like this, and it's got 23 strings on a long neck, and you play it with both hands. And Linda was fascinated with that instrument, so we introduced ourselves to Prince Diabate, who was a great guy, and he was here in LA for a while, and so she started taking lessons, and then we made a couple of trips to West Africa over the next few years for her to meet more musicians in West Africa, know more about it. And she also learned to play the ballon. The ballon is also a big round instrument like this with one neck, and it only has 4 strings. But that ballon is so strong, stronger than a drum what we have. If we played it in this room, it'd shake the walls. And Prince Diabate said that after a couple of years of his lessons and her playing with him in shows, he said she plays the kora better than most of the men in Africa who've been playing for a long time. He said, so he was really proud of the way she played the kora, and I thought it was great, so she did that too. But what I find most interesting about Linda's poetry is that not only did she write typically like in prose and rhyming poetry, like typical poetry, and then which is rhyming poetry, and then prose poetry where it's not rhyming, it's just a narrative. A lot of poets do both of those styles, but she also wrote in other sort of poetic languages. For example, Dada. I mentioned Dada a few minutes ago. Dada is sort of this wacky poetic style that was introduced to the world during World War I in Europe, in the German-speaking nations of Europe, which included like Zurich, Switzerland, Vienna, Austria, Berlin and Munich in Germany, they were so fed up and so despondent about this thing called World War I, and their relatives were dying, their young sons, etc., and other people. And they just were despondent, so they said, everything is crazy, we might as well do crazy poetry. And so they started doing that about what you'd think were like ridiculous subjects with funny costumes, but it became something that caught on. And it's still going on. Then it went to France and also finally to America. And it's a really a prominent part of the poetic scene, but not very many poets do it. So the point of that is, when you read Linda's poetry, it's so diverse, and I'll talk about some other ways that it's diverse, that it becomes a good pedagogical tool or a teaching tool for young poets or other poets who've been around, who've never been exposed, not just to her style, but also things like Dada. And also there's another style called noir, N-O-I-R, noir. We know about noir films. Noir is a French word that means it means night, but it also can mean black or dark. Mm-hmm. La noire, it can mean, la nuit is also a word for night in French. But the noir, it's like this oppressive feeling at night. But also, as I say, shady or dark or black, and it's more of a cynical type. And but she happened to be able to refresh noir poetry and make it really interesting. And also there was some other styles that she would use. One of the funniest ones was another sort of vernacular in poetry. As poetry has several vernaculars that we just talked about. This one is called invented language or invented word poetry. Now, what's unique about this one is Linda never used a naughty word in any of her poems. She did not like to use bad words, dirty words or naughty words, because she believed that poetry, the whole idea of it was to elevate the language, a lesson my father taught me. Mm-hmm. My father, when I was 10 years old, he and I were talking about poetry, and he said he thought that the whole idea of poetry was to elevate the language, and I never forgot that. One of the reasons I started writing poetry when I was traveling, because I wanted to see if I could expand my own language. Well, Linda really expanded the language. And noir poetry, when she was, invented language poetry, she would, when she would down on somebody, she would invent some words in the poem. And the way she would do it is she would take the first 2 or 3 letters of one word and put them at the beginning or the end of another word, and she would also take the 2 or 3 letters that she wanted to use out of that poem and put them at the beginning of the first word, and so she would make some sentence with this juxtaposition and changing around of some of the letters in the words, and at first it's confusing, then you start to read it and you start to laugh. But I'm going to say this. This one poem that she wrote, she and I were both liberal Democrats. We had a very conservative Republican president named George Bush Jr. We all remember George Bush Jr. And she was really mad at something that he did, but she wouldn't use a naughty word. But she was so mad that she named the title of the poem that she wrote, a long poem that she wrote about George Bush and his politics that she didn't like. She named the poem 2 words, Buck Fush. Buck Fush. So if you move those letters around, you can see that she was really angry with this one. It's called Buck Fush. Well, Buck Fush is in at least 1, maybe 2 of these books, and you can read it for yourself. So she was inspired by poetry. The whole idea of expressing yourself with poetry. The idea of learning new words, the idea of creating new words, and also these different vernaculars, these different styles of poetry.
Right. And also maybe at a young age, at 19, learning, very quickly that writing can save your life. That writing can, can change your circumstance, you know, to then grow up and to be the poetry diva of Los Angeles, to be so influential to many poets and many performers out there. I mean, she toured with Alice Cooper, you know, not to mention everything that you've shared with us today.
She did 2 tours in the 80s. Excuse me, Linda did 2 tours with Alice Cooper, The Nightmare and The Nightmare Returns. And if you saw any of those shows, either on the telly, you know, or on YouTube or in live, she was the very tall. In the first one, she was the evil nurse, and the evil nurse that was always giving Alice Cooper a rough time on stage. And in the second, the Nightmare Returns, she was the evil executioner. The evil executioner, and she chopped off Alex's head and threw it out in the audience and those things. Yeah, she loved that. Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned that one.
Yeah. I mean, I think it goes back to how dynamic she was as a performer. You know, to see poetry in these different facets, even to see poetry on the stage of an Alice Cooper, you know, show. Yeah, why not?
Absolutely. And as a matter of fact, when she was early in LA, she was discovered by Hollywood and was actually in some movies. Really a famous director who was a really nice guy. I'm trying to think of his name, but he made a couple of war films and also some other did some other films too. But she was in several films. I think she was in Mary Poppins as well, and but also she had been in some plays. But she was also on television, the Ozzie and Harriet show, and later on the Ricky Nelson show, and then the Monkees, and shows like that. And you know, in the 70s, all of that stuff was, you know, very popular. Yeah. And she was in several of those kind of TV things because she was great to watch her. She was a good actress, and she was, you know, pretty to look at, so, you know, she had as diverse things that she could do, all about art, poetry and performance art and music and film and all this. And she was a great filmmaker too. I mean, she really did some good films.
Yeah, and that's why here at Beyond Baroque, I mean, we admire Linda's work and her legacy because, like you just said, it's all about art, and that's what we do here. Yeah. You know, we have a theater, we have a bookstore, we have some gardens. Most of the days, most of the weeks, we're celebrating poetry and performance and music, and so it's definitely all about art. And before we wrap up, Frank, I was wondering, you mentioned traveling and writing during your travels. What was your favorite place to travel? Where was your favorite place to travel? And you know, do you remember a specific typewriter that you really loved while traveling?
So, you know, when I was doing oceanography, at one point we'd sailed around the world and we stopped at St. Helena, where Napoleon was buried in the South Atlantic. That was a really dramatic movement for me because I had read so much about Napoleon. And the islands of the Indian Ocean and Africa, we stopped in, I think, 12 countries in Africa, in North, East, and South Africa, India, the islands in the Indian Ocean. But my favorite places to be were actually the countries of Europe, because I felt our background is very largely German, with some Irish in one side, and I always felt at home in Europe. But my 2 favorite countries were Denmark, and where I worked in between school and in universities in Europe, and Italy, where I went to University of Perugia. Perugia is a small town, over 3,500 years old, north of Rome, and it's got a great university, one of the oldest universities in Italy, or in the world. But my 2 favorite countries were Denmark and Italy, which are very different in terms of characteristics, but wonderful people in both countries. And in all the countries, France, Germany, you know, I went to school in those, and Great Britain, and, you know, other places all across Europe, wonderful people. But there was something I felt very strongly about, and so those are my 2 favorite countries. So I meet this young lady, and I come to find out after I've known her a little bit that her mother was Danish and her father was Italian. I'm thinking, wait a minute, my two favorite countries, and her mom is Danish and her father is Italian.
It's meant to be.
And it was meant to be. And this is before I ever met either one of them. And I never met her dad, actually. He passed away at the age of 51, I think. But yeah, it was meant to be. Linda always said we were supposed to be together, Frank. You know, it was meant to be.
Yeah.
Because we met one night and stayed together the rest of her life and most of mine.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you know, so we'll be together again.
Yeah.
And we talk on a regular basis. We talk on a daily basis, and once a week I talk to her with a medium.
Right.
And I've studied mediumship, and I've read 91 books on afterlife communication, and I started with quantum mechanics and physics because I'm comfortable with it. I want to understand some of the science behind it. Mm-hmm. And then I went from there. I read about near-death experiences, and I read the medical reports about near-death experiences. I read scientific reports about the actual communication phases. I read a lot about light and also light and communication in between here and what is known as the afterlife. Right. And science considers it not to be on another planet or another universe. They say it's another very near dimension to where we are right now. So fascinating. But
yeah,
does that help?
Yeah, that definitely puts a sum to it. But thanks again, Frank, for stopping by today, and I hope that the folks out on YouTube can find us here in Venice, California. We're open 12 to 6 on Fridays and Saturdays, and we've got all these books for sale, including more behind us.
Have we got a minute, Alex? Can I say one more thing? So Alex is our techie, the famous film man. Alex, he's done several of these YouTube podcasts with me. He's a wonderful guy, and he's an old pal of ours. And he's running the cameras. So after Linda passed away, I was contacted by, of all places, the great Getty Museum. The Getty Museum wanted information about her, wanted her poetry. They also wanted her archives. And we worked for over a year together. But this was right during COVID. Mm-hmm. And then all of this stuff was supposed to go there. And I was telling Linda about this. Linda knew everything that I was doing, which is fine. And she knew I was doing it on her behalf. And we talked about a lot. But finally, the Getty was having financial problems. And my great pal, James Turrell, Jim Turrell, the great artist, it's called the New Leonardo da Vinci of America. Jim and I were old pals since I moved to California in '68. One of the first persons I met became a dear friend. And we also were we had an airplane business together. And both of us are commercial pilots, and we have all that in common and been just great pals. I talked to Jim about it because he's a great artist. And I said, have you heard this about the museums are having financial problems? He says, yeah, it's all over the place, Frank. And if the Getty said they're having, of course they're having it because they got such a drop off during COVID, such a drop off in attendance. Mm-hmm. So I talked to Linda about that, and I said, Beyond Baroque is really interested in your archives. And she said, that's where I want it to go anyway. That's where I'd rather have it go.
Yeah.
She loved this place.
Yeah. Early
on, she was accepted here as a poet, and she felt very close to this place always.
Yeah.
She loved Beyond Baroque, and you will too, folks. If you come and visit, it's a great place.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's all. That's all I wanted to say.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. If you're a poet, this is the place for you. If you're an artist, if you're a musician, our doors are open. So.
Yeah, the doors are open. Great.
Yeah. Thank you, Frank.
Okay, Jimmy. Thanks for having me.
All right.
Okay.
Bye, guys.